It's a great pleasure to be here and to be able to take part in the celebrations of the official launching of the Institute for Social Justice. Yes, much better. And to be part of this panel with good friends, Charles and Rajiv. As you know, the traditional secularization theory assumed that modernization necessarily brings with it secularization, and that the more modern society, the more secular it will be. Secular here meant after religion, without religion. The great contribution of Charles Taylor as a secular age is to indeed present the phenomenological experience of the movement from a homogeneous religious society to our contemporary secular age, where secular doesn't mean without religion or after religion, but it means actually what he calls almost the supernova explosion of individual and collective options of belief, religious, secular, spiritual, etc. Indeed, most revisions of the secularization theory in the last decade have pointed out that what characterizes modernity and modernization is primarily pluralism. Recently, both Charles Taylor and Jürgen Habermas, probably the two most important contemporary philosophers, received the Kluge Prize together, the Library of Congress. And then we had a public debate. And basically, I pointed out how Charles uses a secular age, while Habermas talks of post-secular society, and they both have the same concept, secular in the case of Charles and post-secular in the case of Habermas, to basically point to the same thing. Only post-secular for Habermas means the recognition that we are not only going to be secular societies, but that we have to recognize there are going to be religious people among us. And that so religious and secular people, religious and secular worldviews, have to learn to live together. This is one form of modern pluralism, religious and secular worldviews. But the other, equally important, is the explosion of religious pluralism itself. And this is what, while Europe is characterized by religious secular pluralism, as Charles has pointed out, there is very religious diversity in Europe, other than the one brought by new immigrants today. But from the transformation of modern European society itself, there is no evidence of religious pluralism. What you find is the passage from homogeneous confessional religious societies to homogeneous secular societies. This was the experience of secularization in Europe. We were religious before, we are secular now. We left religious behind as we have become modern. And it was this confessional religion that goes back to the Westphalian system, cuius regio eius religio, meaning that the sovereign imposes the religion upon its subjects. So you have a homogeneous Protestant Northern Europe, a homogeneous Catholic Southern Europe, and three biconfessional societies in between, Holland, Germany, and Switzerland. Simply they couldn't eliminate each other. The ethnic cleansing would have been simply too dramatic, and simply they had to live together, but as Charles pointed out, with pillars, with cantons. So you have Catholics and Protestant cantons in Switzerland, you had Catholics and Protestant pillars in Holland, you had Catholic and Protestant lenders in Germany. So this is one model. And the other great contribution of Charles is this notion of the immanent frame, that indeed what characterizes modernity is the emergence of certain structures that function etsi deus non daretur, as if God would not exist. Science, market economies, citizen states, all of them function as if God could not exist. And these structures have become globalized. But as they have become globalized, they have not been accompanied by secularization, but rather by the explosion of religious beliefs. And that's why I'm not so convinced about the thesis of disenchantment. I think disenchantment is a European phenomenon that was perhaps the condition of possibility for the emergence of the immanent frame. For the immanent frame to emerge in Europe, European modernity had to somehow put religion in its place, create neutral spaces without religion, and thus etsi deus non daretur. But those structures can become globalized, and they are accompanied by religious pluralism. This is the argument about the United States, perhaps one of the first societies to precisely institutionalize the immanent frame, at least in terms of a secular state. And yet, it was accompanied by religious pluralism. Yesterday in his lecture, Charles pointed out the two types of secularism. Assertive secularism that is there to put religion in its place, so that a secular space free from religion, espace de laïcité, is created. But there are other forms precisely of modern societies in which what the secular state does is precisely to create the structure for the flourishing of religious pluralism and religious diversity. And if you look around the world, you see these two types of patterns. The European pattern that goes from homogeneous religiosity to homogeneous secularity. There are some variants, obviously, within Europe, from East Germany, as it was pointed out, to Poland. Those are very different. But again, in both cases, you have still homogeneous religion or homogeneous secularity. You have very few societies in Europe other than other than Ukraine, I would say. I was saying this is my beloved Ukraine, but that's a different issue. Is one of the unique societies that have, with modernization, has been accompanied by explosion of religious pluralism, very much like the United States. But the same pattern you see, for instance, in post-confessional, post-Catholic societies. Quebec has gone from being a homogeneous Catholic society to being a homogeneous secular society. But Brazil, around the same time, went from being a homogeneous Catholic society to being a post-confessional, post-Catholic society with an explosion of religious pluralisms. All forms of Protestantism, Afro-Brazilian religions, Indo-Brazilian religions, all forms of spirituality. You could say that Asia has been characterized by religious pluralism for millennia. So European societies never thought possible that you could have actually religious pluralistic societies. But this is what has been the norm for millennia in Asia, religious pluralism. And actually, modernity has not diminished this pluralism, has only expanded it, increased it. So you have, as modernity expands around the globe, you have these two patterns. Sometimes the state tries to create homogeneous secular societies. China was an example of modernizing elites trying to get rid of religion for the sake of modernization. So smash temples, build schools. The notion of a rational enlightenment, secular enlightenment, was the model of every form of Chinese modernization well before the Cultural Revolution. But the modernizing elites in India decided to use religion precisely in the anti-colonial struggle. And so the different forms of religion in India are mobilized religion that are modern forms of religion that have emerged in the process of the colonial struggle through mobilization. Those are not traditional religions that survive. Those are products of modernization. It took me a very long time to understand religion in America because I always thought religion is a residue that somehow survives. No, American religion is not a residue. It's a product of American modernity. Those are American forms of, modern forms of religion, not residues. It's true that their origins are in Europe, but they were radically transformed in the United States. And today, global cities everywhere, from Sao Paulo to Johannesburg, from Hong Kong, Singapore to London, New York, are characterized by a tremendous explosion of religious pluralism, religious communities that have to learn to live together, basically very, very close together. And what we see, again, it was part of my own discipline, the sociology of the city, urbanization. Secularization was precisely actually carried by urbanization. Even the urban school of sociology in the United States assumed the theory of secularization when, if they would look around, they saw explosion of all forms of religious communities emerging in American cities. And it's interesting, the same immigrants, Italian immigrants, that went from the Mezzogiorno, from southern Italy, that went to Turin and Milan and became anarchists, socialists, and left religion behind, that went to Argentina and also became anarchists and left religion behind, went to New York, Philadelphia, Boston, and actually became Catholics for the first time there. So you have very different phenomenological experiences that are accompanying the process of modernization. In some instances, it is accompanied by this passage from traditional religion to secularity. And this is a very, very important part of the global, basically, experience. But in many other places, modernization going from the countryside to the cities is accompanied by conversion to new forms of religion, to new forms of precisely community experiences. And I think that we have to be open to this as one of the characteristics. And it's very different to understand pluralism only, is not only religious secular pluralism, but the need to accept religious pluralism, especially for those religions that were based on monotheism, and the notion there is only one true religion, and therefore the others are somehow not true, not fully true. They are either schismatics, or heretics, or infidels, or pagans. This was the model of religious pluralism that basically we inherited in the West. It's very different from the model of religious pluralism that was inherited or that was part of the East. But today, basically, in all the global cities, people have to learn to be ecumenical, if you wish. And it's not only the religious elites that do it, but it is people living side by side in the same neighborhoods in all global cities that are learning to precisely accept this religious pluralism as one of the fundamental conditions of our global modern humanity. So indeed, the secular age is one in which there is a fundamental transformation through the institutionalization of this immanent frame, of these structures that function et si deus non daretur, but this is not accompanied necessarily by disenchantment. Indeed, this is the interesting thing, that you can bring market economies, you can bring basically citizen states, you can bring science throughout the world, everywhere, and yet, along with them, comes all forms of religious revivals and development of religious pluralism. I'll stop here.